This is Western Washington's news leader, Cairo Eyewitness News at 5.
Good evening, everyone. It was an elaborate and deadly...
Robert John Winslow and Stephen E. Nelson told the federal magistrate they understand the charges against them. Charges that include conspiracy, possessing a bomb, and firearms charges. Security was tight in the crowded courtroom. Among the onlookers, groups that keep a close eye on hate organizations. They don't believe the danger is over, especially for gays and lesbians.
I think it would be wrong for the community to assume that it's just an isolated incident and to ignore it, forget about it. I think that it has to be recognized that these groups carry with them extreme high danger for violence.
We estimate that over half of the incidents of hate violence are directed against members of the gay community, partially because they are convenient targets in certain communities, and partially because they don't fit into the norm of what these people believe should be proper Americans.
This was the fuel, hundreds of pages of white supremacist literature. These were the weapons, allege authorities, the makings of a pipe bomb, and there were guns, ammunition, knives. Experts say Seattle is lucky no one got a chance to use it. It's been at least 5 years since the Puget Sound area has seen any major hate activity of this kind. Watchdog groups say they will probably be beefing up their education and outreach programs as a response, Gary.
Well, we've seen how violent this can get, because we'll all remember what happened on Whidbey Island and all of the events that surrounded that, with the first time that the order out of the Aryan Nations Church was doing its thing in our area. Why did they come back?
Well, part of the reason is they are trying to get things going again, basically. Some of the experts in the area believe the reason that this got started at this particular time is because there was a youth conference held recently in Coeur d'Alene having to do with the youth movement, the neo-Nazi, the skinhead movement, and they feel that that's in direct correlation to what was hatched in this area.
Okay, thank you.
And of those several area businesses on the neo-Nazis hit list, the first target was to have been Neighbors, a night spot on Seattle's Capitol Hill, and that's where Kevin Penrod is now live with reaction to this latest turn of events. Kevin?
Susie, owner Mustafa El-Asuti of Neighbors said he had absolutely no advance warning that his bar was a potential bomb target. In a statement released late this afternoon, El-Asuti says FBI agents contacted him and informed him of the bomb plot only after they had made their arrests of suspects Winslow and Nelson. Now, El-Asuti, understandably shocked at the news that he was a potential target, says he continued operations Saturday night here at Neighbors, feeling that the FBI had the situation well in hand. He had about 300 people near capacity here at Neighbors. Now, there was a search of bar patrons here, we understand, last night, and El-Asuti wants to make it clear that there may be a misunderstanding about that. His doorman has the prerogative to make cursory searches of customers coming in here. It's to discourage the use of illegal substances inside Neighbors. That search went on at the door here of a few people last night, but El-Asuti says it has absolutely nothing to do with continued bomb fears. Susie, Gary?
Kevin, thank you. Gary?
Well, according to the FBI, the neo-Nazis were targeting our area at this time because of the upcoming Goodwill Games. The Cairo News has learned that information about the threat never got to some important local officials, and that lack of cooperation is a hazard to possibly your safety and also to Seattle taxpayers and our area taxpayers that could to expose them to major financial risks. Now, Cairo's aviation and defense reporter Mark Sauter has been investigating Goodwill Games security and tells us more on this angle.
That's right, Gary. We've learned that while the FBI has known for months about this terrorist threat involving the Goodwill Games, it did not alert some local officials. In recent weeks, when we asked police about possible terrorists they were training to repel, they told us they knew of no specific terrorist threat to the games. And then there's the risk to local taxpayers of terrorist-inflicted financial damage, such as huge lawsuits by victims and their families. Seattle's risk manager, the man supposed to protect us financially, told Cairo he was never told of the neo-Nazi threat.
However, if we have knowledge of a situation which does create a disaster, or potential disaster, then I think that I have the latitude to recommend that we stop whatever we're doing. I think I've got a good enough working relationship with the police department that if they had a problem like that, they would confront me and actually inform me of it.
But the fact is, Boyce was not aware of the neo-Nazis. That raises questions about Seattle's protection from an economic disaster caused by a terrorist attack during the games. It's hard to see how Seattle can get the right kind of insurance when planners don't even know what the risk is. Tomorrow we'll talk about the risk to your safety. We'll show you how local police, the ones supposed to protect you and the Goodwill Games athletes, are not allowed to examine classified FBI information on terrorist threats against our area. And Gary, the FBI just confirmed that the classified portion of analysis the FBI has on white supremacists is part of that classified group of information that local police cannot see. They said, however, the specific information on this attack is in a different category of information. We're still trying to find out whether that was given to local police.
Yeah, but can't you look at this and say, hey, look, they arrested these guys at SeaTac before they could do anything. You know, so is this bad news as far as Goodwill Game security goes, or is it good news?
Well, it's certainly good that these people were arrested in time. I think it raises questions about other possible terrorists who are out there, and also about, say, Seattle trying to get insurance now. They've been having difficulty doing that, and now they say, gosh, we didn't even know about this threat, and meanwhile they're negotiating to try to cover their risks.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much.
If you are a commuter or live with one, your worst nightmare may be happening right now on Interstate 5. A much dreaded...
The cops knew about this, they would start telling every reporter they knew, and the feeding frenzy would begin soon enough.
Exhausted, Zapruder refused to show the film that night, but did agree to meet Stoley the next morning. At 8 a.m. at his dress manufacturing company, Zapruder showed the film to local Dallas Secret Service agents.
When they came to Seattle last weekend, Robert Winslow and Stephen Nelson were arrested outside a Seattle motel early Saturday evening. Today, the two Idaho men, both members of the Aryan Nation's white supremacist groups, appeared in federal court. Gail Jackson was there.
When Robert Winslow and Stephen Nelson were arrested, FBI agents found weapons, neo-Nazi paraphernalia, and components for a powerful pipe bomb. A bomb they say the men planned to use sometime Saturday. Information at a press conference yesterday was sketchy.
The intended victims were to be members of minority groups and/or members of the homosexual community in Seattle.
Today, the specifics of the alleged bomb attempt were laid out in court documents. The target was Neighbors Disco, a gay bar in Seattle. According to a complaint filed before a U.S. magistrate, the men intended to plant a bomb in the bar, warn patrons by telephone that it would go off in 3 minutes, then detonate the charges as patrons tried to flee. FBI agents first learned of the plot in February. They kept the men under electronic surveillance, intercepting conversations in which they heard Winslow describe the point of detonation as the kill zone, and that he expected a high body count from the explosion at Neighbors.
According to the FBI, Neighbors Disco wasn't the only target. Others included a Jewish synagogue in Seattle and bars and businesses in Tacoma.
Agents heard Winslow and Nelson say in the future they plan to blow up the Rain Tree and other black bars in Tacoma, along with several Korean businesses on South Tacoma Way, and that they wanted to get the movement clicking and get maximum impact due to the upcoming Goodwill Games. Marvin Stern is regional director of the Anti-Defamation League in Seattle, which tracks the activities of hate groups. Stern is not surprised by the latest violent plots and says they're linked to declining membership in groups like the Aryan Nations.
We've seen the most virulent, violence-prone of these people who remain out in public turning to the gun and to the bomb out of desperation, and therefore this increase in such violence.
Winslow and Nelson are charged with multiple counts of conspiracy, illegal possession of firearms, and possession of an explosive device. They're being held without bond for a detention hearing on Thursday. In Seattle, Gail Jackson reporting for the 10 o'clock news.
A third alleged member of the ring was arrested in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. 57-year-old James Baker is charged with possession of an unregistered explosive device. He was allegedly found to have 2 pipe bombs, according to an FBI complaint. Baker's neighbors were shocked when they heard of his arrest.
Well, I just hope they get him completely out of here from next door. I don't go along with at all what they're thinking. And I didn't really care about having a neighbor for Aryan nations, that's for sure.
Like the two in Seattle, Baker is being held without bail. In other news, crime or free speech? Appeals of flag-burning cases from Seattle and Washington, D.C. were argued today before the U.S. Supreme Court, both inside...
This is Como News 4.
Good evening. You may have thought it disappeared, but it hasn't.
The network of hate is alive and well, venting anger at minorities and gays, evidenced by arrests made this weekend in Seattle. Tonight, Como's Josephine Cheng is here. She's been looking into why these racial terrorists are resurfacing. Josephine?
Well, Dan, the signs are everywhere. In Paris, where hundreds of Jewish graves were desecrated with Nazi graffiti. In New York, where angry crowds shout racial slurs as a white teenager is being tried for killing a black. And here in Seattle, where Aryan Nation members are accused of planning terrorist bombings just before the Goodwill Games in order to, in their words, get the movement clicking. The FBI confiscated the makings of a bomb along with several weapons when they arrested Robert Winslow and Steven Nelson this weekend. The FBI says their plans were to blow up this gay bar on Capitol Hill last Saturday when it was packed. Other targets include a Jewish synagogue and several Tacoma businesses popular with minorities.
They knew they transgressed against God's laws.
The FBI says the two men are members of Aryan Nations, a white supremacist group based in Hayden Lake, Idaho. If you thought that movement had quietly fizzled, think again.
They know that they'll go to prison. They know that they're taking these risks, and they think it's worth it.
Kevin Flynn believes that after a period underground, they're simply resurfacing. Flynn has been tracking the hate groups from Denver for 6 years. He wrote a book about them. He says they feel increasingly threatened by minorities who are grabbing a bigger slice of the economic pie than they ever dreamed. They need scapegoats.
Did people really think this would go away because we've thrown people in prison for 200 years? It's not going to go away.
In fact, because several neo-Nazi leaders are in jail, some feel their followers are that much more desperate.
Out of frustration.
The arrests of the men gave new incentive to these women who want legislation to protect gays and lesbians from discrimination in Tacoma. Leading the effort is Carla Rudy, who says the planned bombings leave her both frightened and angry.
I mean, frightened because that's my community that it's targeted, and angry because the war on minority groups just keeps escalating. I mean,
last year, Tacoma drafted an anti-discrimination law that included homosexuals, but in November, voters repealed the language protecting gays. And these activists acknowledge they face a tough fight in the months ahead.
yes, I wish there weren't gay people in this world. Well, but there are. It's a fact of life.
Despite her feelings, this woman signed the petition, and Rudy hopes the publicity surrounding the planned white supremacist bombings will help their campaign. The signature gatherers have until June 5th to collect the more than 3,000 ballot signatures they need. They are optimistic they will meet that goal. In Tacoma, Bob Branham, Cairo News.
By summer, we should know if they're back longer than they should have, and out of nowhere,